Well, hello everybody, and the title of today's episode is Double Trouble, for obvious reasons. And it looks like, well, it doesn't look like, I have acquired another oscilloscope, and it's another of these Iwatsu SS5702s. Now, I've already got one of these, which is that one. That's the one I bought first, and as you know, this one has a little bit of a dodgy time division switch. Well, I did actually manage to fix this switch, or rather I managed to kind of bodge it together and make it work again, but I did have my doubts whether or not I'd be able to repair the switch contacts. So I was looking around for just a parts donor for it, and I saw this oscilloscope on eBay, and it said it was broken. It actually said there was something wrong with I think it said it was something wrong with one of the voltage per division switches, and I didn't pay very much money for it. Literally, it was just a few pounds. The delivery was more than the scope itself. But anyway, the scope itself basically works. I'm not going to show you it working at the moment. And as the advertiser said, he was quite correct that the I can't remember which way around it is, but one of the channels works perfectly and the other channel doesn't work correctly on all the settings. I'm hoping this isn't going to be a particularly long video, because I expect you're just as bored of looking at these Iwatsu scopes as I am. But this other scope I've bought, I'm kind of thinking that if nothing else I'm going to get one really good one out of both of them. Because the case on this is in better condition. This one here has quite a bit of rust on it inside, and all the screws are rusty. And although it's functional, I could clean it up. This one is a few years younger, so I'm kind of thinking that, and it's also got a much better, cleaner case on it. There's no ink marks on it, and the screws aren't all rusty like they are on here. So I'm kind of thinking that out of the two, the newer one might actually be a bit better. But before we switch it on, again, just having the two scopes next to each other, it might be quite nice for us to actually have a look at what changed in the few years between them. Now, I think there is actually some date codes or something on here, but I'm not sure. Oh, there is a sticker on here that says the people who actually supplied this. This oscilloscope was supplied by a company called STC Instrument Service, and they were in Edinburgh Way, Harlow. And it's got a telephone number for them, which I'm sure is obsolete now, 0279 29522. Now, is there any other information on it? Well, I can see it was last pat tested in 2013, so we know it was in use still then. I'm looking for some date information. I'm sure I saw something on it somewhere. Well, I've just been looking for some date codes on the ICs and any other markings, and I'm afraid I can't find anything. Well, I can't find anything on the older scope. Now, this is the newer one, and there is some little differences between the new scope and what I think is the older one. Well, actually, the reason I know that this is that the other scope is the older one, because there is a serial number printed on the backs, and this scope has a newer serial number than the other one, so I know it's newer. Now, this scope, the ICs on it do have date codes on them, and they range from between 1983 to 1984. Now, I couldn't find any what I think was date codes as such, but on the other oscilloscope I did find printed on the back of the transformer a few numbers that at the end of it was 82. So I'm thinking it's possible that the other scope is perhaps 1982, and this one is maybe, well, at least the chips are manufactured were in 83 and 84. So yeah, this one is definitely a little bit later, maybe by a couple of years. And there is a couple of things that are different. Now, one of the things I've spotted is that the new scope still has these copper fingers on it, which are basically grounds for the casing. They're shielding. And I did actually notice when I was playing around with the other one that perhaps it did have a slight shielding issue, so I wonder if these were put on afterwards to address that. Now it's also possible that maybe the last person to do a repair on the old scope took the board out and then either forgot to put these back on and or just lost them or something. Maybe there was somebody like me who always has lots of parts left over whenever they repair anything. So yeah, this has the fingers on it. This is the old scope and it doesn't have the fingers. This is the new scope and it does have these little grounding straps. Well, the other difference I found was these wires here, which go to the illuminated graticule. They actually go to some light bulbs that are just under here. I think there must be 3 of them. And now this wiring, I can just zoom you out a bit. The way it's been done is all they've actually done is they've just soldered it on the back of the circuit board here, which is kind of a little bit bodgy, whereas the old scope, I'll just go back to that, the wiring from the dial lamp, well, rather than having like 3 separate wires coming from each lamp, they've actually combined them up here with some heat shrink. They've run the wires down and they've actually run them through a hole in the circuit board there, and there's actually a connector on the other side. Now, for some reason, they haven't bothered to do that. I wonder if the connector's even on there. Let's see if they've taken the connector off. Sorry, let's look at that one. Yeah, okay. Basically, those the dial lamps on the old scope, there should be a connector there, just where I'm pointing the screwdriver, just a little 2-pin header, and that's actually missing. So they've obviously, I wonder what happened. Do you think when they were building it, they had a day in the production shop and, somebody said, we've run out of our 2-pole, 2-pin headers, and they all started running around looking in the Kanban bins and wondering what had happened to all the just-in-time ordering system. And that must have been a bad day in the factory in Japan when they found they didn't have any of them. And then somebody said, oh, don't worry about it, just solder the wires on the back of the board, that'll do, mate. In the best traditions of British Leyland, I love it. Okay, what else can we see? Well, there is something which I think is very interesting, so let me see if we can get both scopes in shot. So let's go back to the old one. I don't think we will get them all in shot, let's try. Well, maybe we will. Okay, so this one is the old, this is the new. So do you remember that I had problems with it triggering and this IC had actually failed? And I actually put a new IC in, but I actually installed an IC socket because originally the IC was soldered into the board. But when I replaced it, I put an IC socket in. Now let's just look at the new oscilloscope. And hopefully you can see that. This is the IC that was giving me all the problems last time. I think it was something like the preamplifier for the trigger circuit. This is the IC that had failed, and this scope has got the same IC installed, but they've actually installed it in a socket. So I do wonder, do we think that maybe that they discovered they did have a problem with this IC failing and they decided to put it in a socket themselves? Maybe this is a failure mode which is kind of unique to this model of scope. And having said that, when I was actually doing some initial research on this oscilloscope on YouTube, I found that there was quite a few, I found a couple of YouTube videos, but they weren't in English. And when I had a look at them, what it appeared to be is the guy was trying to explain, I don't know what language he was speaking, I don't think it might have been Polish or something. I think he was trying to explain that he had a trigger problem with his scope. I mean, he didn't bother to open it up, he was just showing the screen. It was showing the, the calibrator output for trimming your probes. And it was rolling because it wasn't triggering. And again, it just makes me think perhaps there's a common fault with these scopes, which this chip was burnt out. So maybe when they decided to build this scope later on, they actually knew they had a weakness there and they actually bothered to put it in a socket. Now it's either that or the other explanation is this chip again did fail, but the person who had this scope before me, he replaced it, and he did the same as me, he just put it in a socket. But the date code on this chip is an old date code. Again, it's from 1983, whereas obviously the IC that I put in has being a new IC, it's got today's date code, so, or a recent date code. So that makes me think that's a bit strange. Let's look at the old scope again. The old scope has got these straps. I'm not sure if they're across the emitters or the collectors on these. I think they might be across the collectors, I'm not quite sure. But basically they've bothered to strap the two cases together. And I'm wondering if that, well, I'm wondering why they did that. Was it done at the factory or was it done later? I don't know. And again, the new scope, yeah, no straps across there. The circuit board revision numbers, I think, are the same. Let's look at this one. It says it's a K1773. And this says it's a K1773 as well. So, yeah, some little differences. Let's turn it around. Let's see if we can see anything on the other side. It looks like at some point that they actually changed the mounting bracket for this potentiometer. This potentiometer is used for the calibration, to take it out of calibration for the time base. And it looks as though it's got well, it's just like a round piece of aluminium which they've machined and using it to adapt the mountings from the screwed collar on the potentiometer to take you know, two stud mounts. So that's what's on the old one. On the new one, it's actually quite different. They've actually made a kind of a folded bracket. I don't know if I can get you in a little bit better. Maybe you can see that a bit better. So the new oscilloscope has this aluminium kind of, I don't know what you call it, rectangular, angular bracket that they've made to just hold this control. Whereas the old scope has a round mounting. So again, I wonder why they made a change. This mounting arrangement actually looks easier and simpler than the other one. Also, I wonder what they changed. There must be a reason for that, because you know, everything has a production cost. This looks relatively cheap to make. In fact, it looks very cheap to make. Although maybe it was slightly more delicate with all these long extension shafts. I suppose actually, yeah, maybe making right, that's why they will have done it, I suspect. Probably it was something to do with the cost of these machine pins here. They were actually having to manufacture these as opposed and make a spacer. Maybe it was a non-standard spacer. Now they were having to make this aluminium plate anyway, so maybe what they decided to do was make this bent bracket here, which also would have acted as a spacer, so maybe it was a two for the price of one. So yeah, that's a possibility, isn't it? I'm not saying it's right. So the old scope has this nice danger, high voltage label stuck on it. And if we look at the newer one, they decided not to put a sticker on it. They decided that they were just going to put an ink stamp on it. So again, I'm guessing that was a little bit cheaper to do. Well, I don't know if you'll be able to see it on the camera, but there's a Zener diode down here. Or rather, there's actually two Zener diodes, and they've actually soldered them together. So I'm guessing that they needed perhaps to trim a voltage slightly. I'm not sure. Again, maybe this is something to do with coming to the end of a production run, or maybe they've run out of a part and they've yeah, done a bit of a bodge there. Makes you think. Let's just look at the old scope. So the old one just has the single diode down there. I wonder if I can make out the number. It's like D602. So it looks, yeah, so for some reason on the new scope they decided to replace one xenodiode, D602, with two xenodiodes. I mean, I suppose the other reason they might have done it is it could be power dissipation. They might have found that the package was actually running just a little bit too hot and failing, so maybe they've put two xenodiodes in. If we get a chance when we power this up, we'll see if we can get a measurement across that and see if that's correct. But yeah, that's a little kind of dirty trick that you sometimes do, that if you find that you design a circuit that uses a Xeno regulator and the package is just dissipating a little bit more heat than you can get away with, because obviously it's difficult to heat sink something like that. What you tend to do again is, I'm not sure if you call it a Billy Bodge, but basically you put 2 or 3 xenodiodes in and you let each of the Xenos drop a few volts across it, and then basically you can just manage the dissipation across the packages a bit better. Was I convincing there? It almost sounded like I knew what I was talking about. Heavens forbid. One of the differences I've spotted between the old oscilloscope and the new one is the heatsink, which is on this high frequency power supply which generates a HV. So I remember when I actually took this horizontal board out last time when we were repairing the time base. The connectors down here were really difficult to get at. You can't really get your hand in, and you can't really see the components very easily, what's going on here. But I did notice on the newer oscilloscope, the heatsink is actually quite a different design. I mean, I know it might look similar, but this piece here is made from 2 separate pieces of aluminium which are actually screwed together, whereas this one is a single piece of folded aluminium, and it's actually more accessible. I can actually get my hand in there and I can get at the connectors, where I can't actually do it on this one. So I'm not sure why they changed that. Maybe they just found that they didn't need quite as much heat sinking, as much area of metal, and perhaps also this one is, because it has less metal in it and it's aluminium, which is a relatively expensive material. Maybe they thought that they could just save a few pence and make the heatsink a bit smaller. But I don't know whether that's true or not. But again, it is a difference. So we've had a look around these 2 scopes now. Effectively, they're exactly the same model. The only difference between them is, in terms of ages, they're just a few years apart. But there's actually been quite a few changes. Most of these changes seem to be mainly mechanical rather than electrical. So maybe that means that they got the electrical design pretty much right, but they were just looking to shave a few pennies off production. Or maybe they did it just to speed up the production or make it easier to produce these things. So yeah, over a few year period, obviously they did make some changes.